The fluorescent lights in Hale's auto repair flickered like they'd been threatening to die for the past decade. Garrett Hale didn't bother looking up from the engine he was elbow deep in, a 1998 Honda Civic that had seen better years and probably better mechanics. The shop smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and the kind of honest work that left your hands permanently stained no matter how hard you scrubbed. It was nearly 6 in the evening on a Friday, and Garrett had already turned away 2 customers who wanted their oil changed real quick. There was no such thing as real quick in his world. There was only done right or not done at all. The bell above the door chimed. Garrett sighed, wiping his hands on a rag that was beyond saving. "We're closing in 20 minutes. If it's not an emergency, you'll have to come back Monday." Silence. Then a voice. Female, controlled, the kind of voice that was used to boardrooms, not grease pits. "I'm not here about a car." That made Garrett look up. The woman standing in his doorway didn't belong there. That was the first thing anyone would notice. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent, dark jeans that fit like they'd been tailored specifically for her, and heels that clicked against the oil-stained concrete like a countdown timer. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably took 20 minutes to perfect. She held herself like armor, shoulders back, chin up, eyes steady. But Garrett had learned a long time ago to look past what people showed you and see what they were hiding. Her hands were shaking just slightly, the kind of tremor you'd only notice if you were paying attention. And her eyes, dark brown and sharp, held something he recognized all too well. Desperation. "Then what are you here for?" Garrett straightened up, tossing the rag onto his workbench. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than gym memberships. His dark hair was perpetually messy, his face unshaven, and his clothes carried the evidence of a long day's work. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who fixed things for a living and didn't apologize for it. The woman took a breath, and Garrett watched her make a decision. Whatever she was about to say, she'd been rehearsing it. "My name is Caroline Mitchell, and I need to hire you for the weekend." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I don't know what kind of mechanic work you think requires a weekend, but—" Her voice cut through his sentence cleanly. "I don't need a mechanic. I need a boyfriend." The shop fell silent except for the hum of the dying fluorescent lights. Garrett stared at her. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "You've got the wrong place. Whatever this is, I'm not interested." "Please." The word came out softer than she'd intended, and Garrett saw her flinch at her own vulnerability. "Just hear me out. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Something in her voice made him pause. He'd heard a lot of things in his 34 years. Lies, promises, threats, pleading. But there was a quality to her desperation that felt different. Honest, maybe. Or maybe just broken in a way he understood. 5 minutes. Talk." Caroline Mitchell took another breath, and Garrett watched her gather herself like someone preparing for battle. "I come from a family that measures worth in dollars and legacy. Every year we have a gathering, 3 days at the family estate where everyone brings their partners, shows off their achievements, and quietly tears each other apart under the guise of civility. I've attended alone for the past 5 years. Every single time, I'm reminded that despite everything I've accomplished professionally, I'm considered incomplete because I don't have someone standing next to me." Garrett didn't say anything. He just listened. "This year, I can't do it alone again." Her voice was steadier now, like she was presenting a business case. "I don't need romance. I don't need affection. I just need someone who can stand in a room full of people who will judge every word, every gesture, every breath, and not crumble under it. Someone real. And you think I'm that someone? You don't know anything about me." "Actually, I do." Caroline reached into her purse, an expensive leather thing that probably had its own security system, and pulled out her phone. A few taps later, she turned the screen toward him. Garrett recognized the video immediately. It had been taken 3 months ago on a scorching afternoon when he'd been driving back from picking up parts. An elderly couple stranded on the side of the highway with a smoking engine and no cell service. He'd pulled over, spent 2 hours getting their car running again, and refused payment despite the old man's insistence. Someone had filmed the whole thing, posted it online. It had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments about faith in humanity restored, and real heroes don't wear capes. Garrett had ignored all of it. I saw this video the day it was posted. I watched you spend 2 hours in 100-degree heat helping complete strangers. I watched you refuse money from people who clearly didn't have much to give. I watched you treat them with dignity and kindness when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it. She met his eyes. That's why I'm here. Because I need someone who understands that kindness isn't a transaction. Someone who won't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by my family's status. Someone who will just be real. Garrett studied her for a long moment. The shop was quiet except for the buzz of those dying lights and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. What's the catch? No catch. I'll pay you. No. The word came out harder than he'd intended. If I do this, and that's a big if, it's not for money. Caroline blinked. I don't understand. I don't need your money. I've got enough to pay my bills and keep this place running. That's sufficient. If I agree to this, it's because I choose to, not because you paid me to. For the first time since she'd walked into his shop, Caroline Mitchell looked genuinely surprised. Why would you choose to? Garrett considered the question. Why would he? He had a simple life. Work, sleep, the occasional beer with Frank and Jack, who worked at the body shop down the street. He kept his head down, his hands busy, and his heart carefully locked away where it couldn't be damaged again. Getting involved in some wealthy woman's family drama was the exact opposite of simple. But there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of the way he'd felt after Claire died. That specific kind of loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who looked at you but never actually saw you. Because I think you're telling the truth, and I think you actually need help, not hired help. There's a difference. Caroline's armor cracked just slightly. So you'll do it? One condition. If at any point during this weekend I think you're playing me, using me for some game I don't understand, or putting on a show for people who don't matter, I walk. No explanation, no second chances. I just leave. That's fair. And no money. Not a dollar. This isn't business. Then what is it? Garrett picked up his rag again, more out of habit than need. I guess we'll find out. When's this thing happening? Next weekend, Friday through Sunday. The estate is about 2 hours north of here in wine country. Of course it is. They exchanged information, and Garrett found himself looking at a contact that simply read Caroline Mitchell with a local area code. No company name, no title. Just a name. Thank you. The relief in her voice was palpable. You have no idea what this means to me. Probably not, but I'm starting to get the picture. Caroline turned to leave, then paused at the door. That couple you helped on the highway, did you ever find out what happened to them? Garrett shrugged. Never asked. Wasn't helping them, so I'd get a story out of it. Caroline smiled. A real smile this time, not the polished version she'd walked in with. No, I don't suppose you were. After she left, Garrett stood in his empty shop for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. The smart thing would be to text her right now and cancel. Whatever mess she was walking into, it wasn't his problem. He had his own ghosts to manage, his own wounds that still hadn't fully healed. But he didn't cancel. Instead, he went back to the Honda Civic, finished the job he'd started, and tried not to think about cream-colored blazers and eyes that held too much loneliness for one person to carry alone. The week passed in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and the steady rhythm of work that had defined Garrett's life for the past 6 years. He didn't hear from Caroline again until Thursday evening when his phone buzzed with a text. The message was direct. "Picking you up tomorrow at 3. Pack business casual clothes for dinners, something comfortable for daytime. The family dresses for evening meals." Garrett looked down at his phone, then at his closet. A collection of jeans, work shirts, and exactly 2 button-downs he kept for occasions that required looking slightly less like a mechanic. He texted back, "Define business casual." Her response came quickly. "Do you own a blazer?" "No." "I'll handle it. What's your size?" "I can buy my own clothes." "I know you can, but you said no money for the arrangement. You didn't say no practical necessities. What's your size?" Garrett sighed. The woman had a point, even if it annoyed him. 44 long, 34 by 34 pants. Don't go crazy. I'll try to restrain myself. See you tomorrow. The next day, at exactly 3 in the afternoon, a black Mercedes SUV pulled up in front of Hale's auto repair. Garrett had already locked up, changed into clean jeans and a navy Henley, and thrown a duffel bag together with what he hoped would pass for appropriate weekend attire. Caroline stepped out of the driver's seat, and Garrett did a double take. Gone was the boardroom armor. She wore dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and ankle boots. Her hair was down, falling in waves past her shoulders. She looked younger, more real. "You look different." "So do you. I wasn't sure you owned anything without grease stains." "I have layers." The drive north was quiet at first. Caroline navigated through city traffic with the kind of precision that spoke to someone who'd made this drive many times before. Garrett watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to suburban neighborhoods to rolling hills covered in vineyards. "So, you going to tell me what I'm walking into, or are we doing this blind?" Caroline's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "My family is complicated. Most families are. Not like this." She took a breath. "My father built a real estate empire from nothing. By the time I was born, we had more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. My mother came from old money, the kind where your last name matters more than anything you actually do. Together, they created this expectation machine." Garrett listened without interrupting. "I have 2 siblings. My older brother, Preston, runs the West Coast operations of my father's company. He's married to a woman whose family owns half the commercial properties in San Francisco. They have 3 perfect children and a perfect life, at least on paper. My younger sister, Vivian, married into European aristocracy. An actual count, if you can believe it. They split their time between Monaco and Switzerland. She specializes in making everyone else feel inadequate by simply existing." "Sounds delightful. And your parents?" "My father will assess you like a business acquisition. My mother will smile while cataloging every flaw. They won't be outright cruel. That would be gauche. But they'll make their opinions known in ways that feel like compliments until you really think about what they said." Garrett processed this. "And where do you fit in this picture?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. "I'm the one who disappointed everyone by choosing the wrong kind of success." "The wrong kind?" "I run my own company. Technology consulting for mid-sized businesses. We help companies streamline their operations, implement better systems, scale efficiently. It's successful. We're profitable, growing, making a real difference for our clients." She paused. "But I'm not building a dynasty. I'm not married into power. I'm not producing the next generation of the Mitchell family legacy. I'm just Caroline, who works too hard at something they don't understand and comes to family gatherings alone, which is apparently the worst crime of all." "You said you've done this alone for 5 years. What changed?" Caroline's jaw tightened. Last year, my mother pulled me aside after dinner. She told me she was worried about me, that a woman in her 30s without a partner was either hiding something or broken. She suggested I see someone, a therapist, to work through whatever trauma was preventing me from forming normal attachments. Jesus. I told her I didn't need therapy to explain why I hadn't found someone worth my time. She said that was exactly the kind of defensive response that proved her point. Caroline's laugh was bitter. So this year I decided I was done being their cautionary tale. I'm bringing someone. Someone real who won't be impressed by the money or the name or the whole performance. Someone who will just exist as himself and remind me that there are people in the world who measure worth differently. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice careful. You know this is just going to create more questions, right? They're going to want to know where you met me, what I do, why you chose me. You're trading one kind of scrutiny for another. I know, but at least this scrutiny is on my terms. I chose you. Not because you fit some checklist or because our families would merge well or because you'd look good in Christmas card photos. I chose you because you helped strangers on a highway in 100-degree heat and wouldn't take their money. That means something to me, even if it won't mean anything to them. Garrett found himself respecting her more than he'd expected to. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about survival, about making it through one more weekend in a world that had never quite made space for who she actually was. All right, then let's get our story straight. Where did we meet? Caroline glanced at him, and for the first time since they'd started driving, she smiled. Actually, we can tell them the truth. That video of you helping that couple went viral enough that saying I saw it and tracked you down isn't unbelievable. We can say I brought my car in for service. We got to talking, and it developed from there. How long have we supposedly been together? 3 months. Long enough to be serious. Not so long that they'll question why they haven't heard about you before. For the next hour, as vineyards rolled past the windows and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Caroline briefed him on her family's social dynamics. She told him about her father's obsession with legacy and expansion, about her mother's suffocating concern disguised as care, about Preston's competitive streak and Vivian's casual cruelty dressed up as sophistication. She told him about the family dinners where every conversation was a negotiation, about the way they kept score of achievements and failures, about the unspoken rule that vulnerability was weakness and weakness was unforgivable. And as Garrett listened, he began to understand why this woman had walked into his shop looking for help. She wasn't running from her family's wealth or status. She was running from their emptiness. One more thing. Caroline's voice pulled him from his thoughts as they turned off the highway onto a smaller road lined with oak trees. My family doesn't know what I do for a living. Not really. They know I run a company, but they think it's small, cute, a hobby that keeps me busy. Is it? We did $45 million in revenue last year. We employ 67 people. We've transformed operations for over 200 companies. Caroline's voice was quiet. But I don't talk about it at family gatherings because the moment I do, my father will want to acquire it. Preston will want to compete with it. And my mother will find some way to turn my success into evidence of my inability to balance work and personal life. Garrett let out a low whistle. You're not just successful, you're legitimately successful. Does that change things? Should it? Caroline looked at him, really looked at him. For most people, yes. Good thing I'm not most people. They drove in comfortable silence after that, until the road began to climb into hills that were manicured rather than wild. The vineyards here were pristine, the fences decorative, the estates visible in the distance looking more like hotels than homes. Finally, Caroline turned through a gate that opened automatically at their approach. The driveway was lined with Italian cypress trees, leading to a house that made Garrett bite back a curse. It wasn't a house, it was an estate, sprawling stone and glass that looked like it had been airlifted from Tuscany and planted in Northern California wine country. The main structure was 3 stories of elegant architecture, with wings extending on either side and terrace gardens visible in the fading light. Home sweet home. Caroline's voice carried irony thick enough to touch. As they pulled up to the circular driveway, Garrett saw other vehicles already parked, a Bentley, a Range Rover, a Tesla that probably cost more than his entire shop. Through the massive windows, he could see people moving around inside, elegant figures in expensive clothes, preparing for whatever performance the weekend required. Caroline put the car in park and sat there for a moment, her hands still on the steering wheel. Last chance to run. Garrett looked at the house, then at her. You running? I don't have that option. Then neither do I. He reached for his door handle, then paused. Hey, Caroline. She turned to look at him. Whatever happens in there, remember that you asked me here because you wanted someone real. So that's what I'm going to be. Real. Myself. If that embarrasses you or doesn't fit what they expect, that's not my problem. Got it? For a moment, Caroline just stared at him. Then something in her expression softened. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. Got it. They got out of the car just as the front door opened. A woman emerged, early 60s, perfectly coiffed, wearing cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost what Garrett made in a month. Her smile was warm and welcoming, right up until her eyes landed on Garrett. Then the smile became something else entirely. More calculation than greeting. Caroline, darling, you made excellent time. Traffic was light. Caroline's voice had shifted, becoming more formal, more careful. Mother, this is Garrett Hale. Garrett, this is my mother, Charlotte Mitchell. Garrett extended his hand. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for having me. Charlotte took his hand, her grip firm but brief, her skin soft in a way that spoke to expensive lotions and a life free from manual labor. How lovely to meet you, Garrett. Caroline has told us absolutely nothing about you, which means we get the pleasure of discovering you fresh. The words were friendly. The tone was not. I'm an open book, not much mystery to uncover. Oh, I doubt that. Everyone has mysteries. The question is whether they're interesting ones. Before Garrett could respond, a man appeared in the doorway, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from decades of commanding rooms full of people who wanted something from him. Caroline. And this must be the mysterious boyfriend we've heard so little about. Father, this is Garrett Hale. Garrett, my father, Robert Mitchell. Robert descended the steps with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to any space he occupied. His handshake was firm. A test, Garrett realized, seeing how hard he'd squeeze back. Garrett matched it exactly, not competing, not yielding. Equal. Robert's eyebrow rose slightly. Firm grip, that's good. Shows character. Or just that I work with my hands. And what is it you do exactly? I'm a mechanic. I own an auto repair shop in the city. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte's smile froze in place. Robert's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. From inside the house, Garrett heard someone laugh, the sound cutting off abruptly as if they'd been shushed. A mechanic. Robert repeated the word slowly, as if testing it. How practical. Someone has to keep people's cars running. Indeed, Charlotte chimed in, her voice bright in a way that felt dangerous. How wonderfully down to earth. Caroline, you've always had such an interesting way of surprising us. Caroline's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Well, our baby sister actually brought someone. I didn't think this day would ever come. A man emerged from the house, mid-40s, expensively dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater, with dark hair going distinguished at the temples. Behind him came a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a society magazine, and 3 children who ranged from about 8 to 14, all dressed like they were heading to a country club. Preston. Garrett, this is my brother Preston, his wife Patricia, and their children. Preston looked Garrett up and down with the kind of assessment that reduced a person to their market value. A mechanic. How refreshingly blue-collar. Tell me, Garrett, where exactly did you two meet? At my shop. Caroline brought her car in. We got to talking. How romantic. Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Car trouble leading to love. Like something out of a movie. Life's stranger than fiction sometimes. Indeed it is. Another voice, this one carrying a faint European accent. A woman descended the main staircase, visible through the open door, younger than Preston, older than Caroline, with the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance and genetic luck. I'm Vivian, the sister who made the sensible choice of marrying well, rather than working herself to exhaustion. And you must be the famous Garrett. My goodness, he's even more rugged than I imagined. Very authentic. The way she said authentic made it sound like an insult. Garrett had spent exactly 5 minutes with the Mitchell family, and he already understood why Caroline had walked into his shop looking desperate. These people didn't have conversations. They had verbal fencing matches where every word was chosen to draw blood while maintaining plausible deniability. Why don't we get you both settled, Charlotte suggested, gesturing toward the house. Dinner's at 7, business casual as always. I'm sure Caroline can help you navigate our dress code, Garrett. I'm sure she can. As they walked into the house, Preston fell into step beside Garrett. So, a mechanic. That's honest work. Pays the bills, I imagine. It does. I'm sure it does, though I imagine the bills are quite different in your world than in ours. Preston's smile was friendly. His eyes were not. How long have you and Caroline been seeing each other? About 3 months. Funny, she hasn't mentioned you once in our weekly calls. Maybe she wanted to keep something private for once, or maybe she wanted to make sure you were worth mentioning before she subjected you to the Mitchell family experience. We can be a bit intense. I've noticed. Have you now? Preston's laugh was easy, practiced. Well, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until dinner. That's when things get really interesting. They reached the grand staircase, and Caroline touched Garrett's arm. We're in the East Wing. I'll show you to your room. Rooms, Charlotte corrected gently. We've put Garrett in the blue room right next to yours, dear. I know you're modern young people, but this is still my home, and we do maintain certain standards. Caroline's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. Of course, Mother. The blue room is lovely. As they climbed the stairs, Garrett could feel multiple sets of eyes on his back. Assessing. Judging. Cataloging every detail for later discussion. He'd walked into war zones that felt less hostile than this entrance hall. Caroline led him down a hallway lined with expensive art and family photos that looked more staged than lived in. She stopped at a door, pushing it open to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than Garrett's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the vineyard. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, and the attached bathroom was visible through an open door. All marble and gold fixtures. This is the blue room. Garrett set his bag down, then turned to face her. Caroline closed the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaustion suddenly visible in every line of her body. Your family's intense is like saying the ocean's damp. I'm sorry. I knew they'd be difficult, but don't apologize. You warned me. Garrett studied her face. You okay? I've had warmer welcomes at dental appointments. Garrett surprised himself by laughing. Yeah, I got that impression. Your brother's a piece of work. Preston sees everyone as either competition or a resource. You're currently being evaluated for which category you fall into. And your sister? Vivian measures her worth by how thoroughly she can make others feel inadequate. It's her only real skill. Caroline pushed away from the door, moving to the window. I should let you get settled. Dinner's in an hour. Do you need help with… She stopped as Garrett opened his duffel bag and pulled out the clothes Caroline had sent over. A perfectly fitted blazer in charcoal gray, matching slacks, and a crisp white shirt that had clearly been tailored to his measurements. How did you know my exact size? Caroline had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have asked one of my employees who's good with measurements to help. She saw that viral video of you and was able to estimate pretty accurately. That's either impressive or creepy. Probably both. But you needed clothes that would fit this world, and I needed you to feel comfortable. Consider it tactical preparation. Garrett held up the blazer, checking the fit. It was perfect. Of course it was perfect. This probably costs more than my entire wardrobe combined. Don't think about it that way. Think of it as armor. We're going into battle, and you need the right gear. Garrett looked at her reflection in the window. This woman who ran a $45 million company but couldn't get her own family to see her as anything other than incomplete. Are you always this alone with them? The question hung in the air between them. Caroline's shoulders tensed. Yes, always, even when I'm standing right next to them. Garrett set the blazer down carefully. Then I guess it's a good thing you've got backup this weekend. Caroline turned from the window, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she smiled, small but genuine. Yeah, I guess it is. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Garrett, thank you. For coming, for not running when my mother made that comment about mysteries, for just being exactly who you said you'd be. Weekend's not over yet. Still plenty of time for me to embarrass you at dinner. Somehow I doubt that. After she left, Garrett stood alone in the blue room, looking out at vineyards that probably produced wine he'd never taste and couldn't afford if he wanted to. He thought about his shop, about the Honda Civic he'd finished before leaving, about the simple life he'd built brick by careful brick after losing everything that mattered. This weekend was going to test every wall he'd built around his heart. But as he changed into clothes that fit better than anything he'd ever owned, Garrett found himself thinking about Caroline's eyes when she'd admitted she was always alone with her family. He thought about the way she'd held herself together in front of their judgment, the armor she wore that was so much heavier than any blazer. And he thought about the fact that he'd agreed to this plan not for money, not for excitement, but because he'd recognized something in her that he knew too well. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who looked at you, but never actually saw you. Garrett checked his reflection in the mirror. The mechanic from the city wearing clothes worth more than his monthly rent, about to have dinner with people who measured worth in dollars and legacy. Well, this should be interesting. Then he opened the door and went to face whatever the Mitchell family had planned, knowing that the real test wasn't about surviving their questions or their judgment. It was about helping one woman feel less alone for one weekend. And that, Garrett thought as he walked down the hallway toward sounds of cultured voices and clinking crystal, was something he could do, even if it cost him more than he was ready to admit. The dining room could have comfortably seated 30 people. Tonight, it held 9. The Mitchell family arranged around a table that gleamed with crystal and silver, lit by chandeliers that cast everything in a warm glow that felt anything but warm. Garrett sat to Caroline's left, directly across from Vivian and her husband Henri, a man who had the kind of aristocratic boredom that came from never having worked a day in his life. Preston and Patricia flanked Robert at the head of the table, while Charlotte presided from the opposite end like a queen surveying her court. The 3 children had been banished to eat elsewhere, presumably so the adults could speak freely. Uniformed staff served the first course, some kind of soup that probably had a French name Garrett wouldn't pronounce correctly. He picked up the correct spoon without hesitation. Caroline had texted him a diagram of formal place settings during his 45 minutes of preparation. Robert began as the soup was placed before them, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. "So Garrett, Caroline tells us you own your own business. That's admirable. The American dream, building something from nothing. I don't know about the American dream, but it's mine and it pays the bills." How modest. Vivian's voice carried that faint accent that suggested European finishing schools and summers on the Riviera. "Tell me, how does one go from being a mechanic to dating someone like our Caroline? It seems quite the social leap." Caroline's water glass stopped halfway to her lips. Garrett met Vivian's eyes calmly. "Well, Vivian, I met her at my shop when she needed help. We talked. Turned out we had things in common. As for social leaps, I don't really think in those terms. People are people regardless of their bank accounts." "How very egalitarian," Henri murmured, sounding like he'd never met an actual egalitarian in his life. "What kinds of things did you have in common?" Patricia's tone suggested this was a genuine mystery. "I'm trying to imagine what a mechanic and a tech CEO would bond over." Garrett took a sip of wine, something that probably cost more per bottle than he made in a day, and considered his answer carefully. "We both know what it's like to build something from scratch. We both understand that reputation matters more than advertising, and we both appreciate honesty over performance." The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Charlotte's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. "Honesty is certainly important, though I've always believed that courtesy and honesty can coexist beautifully when one has sufficient practice." "I'm sure they can. I just prefer to spend my time fixing engines instead of perfecting diplomatic language." Preston laughed, a sharp sound. "I like him, Caroline. He's refreshingly direct. Not at all what I expected." "And what did you expect?" Caroline's voice was quiet, controlled. "Someone more polished. Someone who understood the way our world works." Preston swirled his wine, considering. "But maybe that's exactly why you chose him? Because he doesn't understand it, and therefore can't be corrupted by it. Or maybe I chose him because he treats me like a human being instead of a business opportunity." The table fell quiet, except for the clink of silverware against china. Staff moved efficiently, replacing the soup course with some kind of fish that had been prepared with techniques Garrett didn't recognize. Charlotte broke the silence, her voice bright in a dangerous way. "Well, I think it's wonderful that you found someone who sees you that way, dear. Though I do hope you're being careful. Relationships that form quickly can dissolve just as quickly when the initial excitement fades." "We've been together 3 months, Mother, not 3 weeks. 3 months. Yes, that's still quite new, isn't it? The honeymoon phase, as they say. Everything seems magical when you're not yet living with someone's daily realities." Garrett felt Caroline tense beside him. He set down his fork carefully, keeping his voice level. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've lived through enough reality to know the difference between magic and substance. What Caroline and I have might be new, but it's built on actually knowing each other, not on avoiding each other's flaws." Charlotte's eyebrows rose delicately. "And you feel you know my daughter well enough to make that assessment after 3 months? I know she works herself to exhaustion building something real. I know she cares about her clients more than her profit margins. I know she tips servers double because she thinks they're undervalued. And I know she drove 2 hours to find me because she needed someone in her corner who wasn't there for the performance." Garrett paused. "Is that enough for 3 months, or should I have memorized her childhood trauma by now?" Vivian choked on her wine. Henri looked like he'd just witnessed a car accident. Preston's expression was somewhere between shocked and impressed. Robert, surprisingly, smiled. "You've got spine, I'll give you that." "It's not spine, it's just the truth." "The truth." Robert repeated the word thoughtfully, setting down his own fork. "An interesting concept. Tell me, Garrett, what's the truth about your business?" How's a small auto shop surviving in an economy where dealerships and chains dominate the market? Garrett recognized the shift. Robert moving to more comfortable ground where he could assess and categorize. We survive because we're good at what we do and we charge fair prices. People trust us because we don't upsell them on services they don't need. It's a simple model, but it works. And your growth strategy? Expansion plans? I don't have expansion plans. I have a shop that employs 3 good mechanics, serves customers who need us, and makes enough to keep everyone paid and the lights on. That's sufficient. Robert's fork paused midway to his mouth. Sufficient. Not thriving, not growing, not building towards something larger. Just sufficient. Sufficient is underrated. Not everyone needs to conquer the world. No. Robert's voice carried weight. But everyone who's worth their salt wants to leave a mark. Legacy matters, Garrett. What we build, what we pass on, that's what defines us. Garrett thought about Claire, about the plans they'd made, about the future that had died with her on a rain-slicked highway, about the 6 years since where he'd deliberately kept his world small and manageable and safe. I think what defines us is how we treat people when we have nothing to gain from treating them well. Legacy is just another word for ego if it comes at the expense of actual human decency. The soup course was cleared in silence so thick you could have cut it with the sterling silver knives. The fish arrived with some kind of reduction that probably required 3 days of preparation, and for several minutes everyone ate without speaking. Then Patricia broke the tension, her voice carrying forced brightness. So, Garrett, do you have family in the area? Siblings? Parents we might meet? Caroline's hand found his knee under the table. A warning or a comfort. Garrett couldn't tell which. My parents passed away when I was young. Car accident. I was raised by my uncle. He died about 8 years ago. Heart attack. No siblings. Charlotte's expression softened fractionally. Oh, how tragic. And your uncle? Did he have family? Just me. So no, I'm quite alone in terms of blood relatives. So you're quite alone, Vivian observed, and there was something calculating in her tone. No family at all. That's one way to look at it. Garrett kept his voice even. Another way is that I've learned to build family from people who choose to be in my life rather than people who share my DNA. How very modern. Henri's voice suggested modern was synonymous with unfortunate. Preston leaned forward, his expression sharp with interest. And have you built that chosen family? People who matter to you outside of Caroline? Garrett thought about Frank and Jack at the shop, about the regular customers who'd become friends over years of honest service, about the network of people who'd shown up when he needed them most. Yeah, I have. How lovely. Charlotte's tone had shifted slightly, become marginally warmer. Though I must say there's something irreplaceable about blood family. The history, the shared experiences, the understanding that comes from truly knowing where someone came from. Maybe, Garrett allowed. Or maybe blood family just has more practice at knowing exactly where to stick the knife so it hurts the most. The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett watched the impact of his words ripple across the table. Shock from Patricia, calculation from Preston, something like approval from Vivian, careful neutrality from Henri. Robert set down his wineglass with deliberate precision. That's quite an accusation. It's an observation, not an accusation. And I'm not that young. Garrett. Caroline's voice carried warning. But Garrett was done being careful. He'd watched this family dissect Caroline's choices since the moment they'd arrived. He'd listened to their polite cruelty disguised as concern, their assessments wrapped in courtesy, their judgment delivered with smiles. I apologize if I've been too direct. I'm not used to conversations where what people mean and what they say are two completely different things. Where I come from, if you have a problem with someone, you say it. You don't dress it up in compliments and call it love. And where you come from, do you also make sweeping judgments about families you've known for less than 2 hours? Vivian's voice had gone icy. Where I come from, 2 hours is plenty of time to see whether people treat each other with respect or use their connections as an excuse to tear each other down. Preston's laugh was sharp. You think you have us all figured out based on one dinner? I think I figured out that Caroline was right to be nervous about this weekend, and I think she was also right to want someone here who wasn't performing for your approval. Performing. Robert's voice carried an edge now. You think we're performing? I think every single person at this table except Caroline and me is playing a role. Concerned mother, protective father, successful older brother, sophisticated younger sister. Everyone's hitting their marks perfectly. It's very polished. Garrett met Robert's eyes steadily. But polish and substance aren't the same thing. The fish course sat forgotten as the Mitchell family absorbed this assessment. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice carefully controlled. You have a lot of opinions for someone who's been invited into our home as a guest. You asked me questions. I answered them honestly. If you wanted polite lies, you should have specified that up front. Garrett, Caroline said again, and this time there was something close to panic in her voice. But Robert surprised everyone by laughing, a genuine sound that seemed to catch even Charlotte off guard. You know what? I respect it. Most people who sit at this table spend the entire time trying to figure out what I want to hear. You don't give a damn what I want to hear. Should I? Probably, if you want a future with my daughter. I have a certain amount of influence over her life, whether she admits it or not. Then here's something else I should probably tell you. Garrett's voice was steady. I don't want anything from Caroline except her company. I'm not here to network, to advance my business, to access her money or connections or anything else. I'm here because she asked me to be. That's the only reason that matters. Patricia set down her fork with a sharp clink. How refreshingly noble. Though I have to wonder, is it really nobility, or is it just that you don't understand what's actually available to you? Patricia. Preston's voice carried warning. But Patricia was committed now. I mean, let's be realistic. Caroline is successful, educated, from a prominent family. She moves in circles where business and personal life naturally intertwine. Are you truly telling us that you wouldn't benefit from her connections? That your little shop wouldn't grow if you had access to her network? My shop is exactly the size I want it to be. I don't need growth. I don't need connections. What I need is to do good work for fair pay and go home at night knowing I helped someone solve a problem. Caroline's connections don't factor into that equation. Then you're either a liar or a fool. Vivian's voice was blunt. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. You're just better at hiding yours. Caroline stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Or he's telling the truth, and you can't comprehend that because you've never met anyone who values integrity over advancement. Everyone turned to look at her. Caroline's face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. Garrett came here because I asked him to. Not because he thought he'd gain something from our family. Not because he's looking for business opportunities. Not because he's trying to climb some social ladder you all seem to think everyone's desperate to ascend. He came because I needed help, and he's the kind of person who helps people when they ask. Darling, Charlotte began, but Caroline cut her off. No, Mother. You wanted honesty. Let's have honesty. You've spent the entire meal trying to figure out what's wrong with Garrett. What his angle is, what he's hiding, why he's really here. It hasn't occurred to any of you that maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe the problem is that in your world, no one does anything without calculating what they'll get in return. and you can't imagine someone who operates differently. That's not fair, Preston protested. Isn't it? Caroline turned to her brother. When's the last time you did something for someone without calculating what you'd get in return? When's the last time any of you acted out of simple kindness instead of strategic advantage? The table fell silent. Henri took a long drink of wine. Patricia studied her plate with sudden fascination. Vivian's jaw was tight. Even Robert seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Charlotte recovered first, her voice carefully modulated. Sweetheart, I think you're being unfair. We're your family. Everything we do comes from a place of love and concern. Then why do I always leave these weekends feeling like I failed some test I didn't know I was taking? The question hung in the air like smoke. Garrett watched Charlotte's face cycle through several emotions before settling on practiced concern. If you feel that way, darling, that's something we should discuss. Perhaps in private, where we can speak more freely. We're speaking freely now. Caroline's voice was firm. Garrett isn't a stranger who needs protecting from family drama. He's here precisely because of it. Yes, Vivian interjected, leaning back in her chair. Which brings up an interesting point. You've known this man for 3 months, and you're already using him as a shield against your own family. Don't you think that's a bit dramatic? I think it's survival. Caroline's response was immediate. And I think you'd understand that if you'd ever had to defend your choices to people who are determined to find them inadequate. Vivian's laugh was sharp, defensive. Please. I married into European nobility. You don't think I face scrutiny? You married someone our family approved of. Someone whose pedigree matched their expectations. You've never once had to justify your choices because you've only ever made choices they'd celebrate. That's not true. Name one time. Caroline's challenge was direct. One time you've done something this family didn't immediately embrace. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, looked to Henri for support. Henri was suddenly very interested in his wine glass. Robert cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the conversation. I think we're getting off track. Garrett, regardless of how this conversation has evolved, I'd like to understand something. You say you value sufficiency over growth. That's a valid personal choice. But what happens when Caroline needs more than sufficiency? She's built a company that's actively expanding. Her world requires ambition, drive, constant evolution. How do you fit into that? It was a good question. Fair, even. Garrett considered it seriously, aware that everyone at the table was watching for his response. I fit in by supporting what she's building without trying to change it or control it. I fit in by being someone she doesn't have to perform for. Someone who sees her as a person instead of a portfolio. And I fit in by understanding that my worth to her isn't measured by what I can contribute to her business, but by what I contribute to her life. That's a lovely sentiment. Patricia's voice carried skepticism. But sentiment doesn't pay bills or build futures. No. Hard work pays bills, and futures are built by people who show up every day and do what they said they'd do. I might not have your wealth or your connections, but I show up for my customers, for my employees, and for Caroline. That's my contribution. Such refreshing simplicity, Charlotte murmured, though I do wonder what happens when the novelty wears off. When Caroline realizes that her world and yours are fundamentally incompatible. Garrett looked at Caroline, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope mixed with fear, vulnerability beneath armor. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to assume failure just because we come from different backgrounds. Different backgrounds is putting it mildly. Preston's tone wasn't unkind, just brutally honest. Caroline's company did over $45 million in revenue last year. What did your shop make? The number hung in the air like an accusation. Garrett didn't flinch. Enough to keep 5 families fed and housed. That's the only number that matters to me. And when Caroline's company hits 100 million, 200, Preston pressed, when she's traveling internationally for deals, when she's making decisions that affect hundreds of employees, are you going to be content being the mechanic boyfriend who waits at home? I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. Garrett's honesty was deliberate. But I do know that I won't measure my value by comparison to her success. I'll measure it by whether I make her life better or worse. And if it's the latter, I'll have enough respect for both of us to walk away. The admission seemed to catch everyone off guard. Caroline's hand found his under the table, squeezing tight. Robert studied Garrett for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least you're realistic about your limitations. I prefer to think of them as boundaries. Everyone has them. Some people just pretend they don't. The main course arrived, lamb with some kind of reduction that probably required 3 days of preparation. The staff moved efficiently, replacing plates, refilling wine glasses, maintaining the smooth operation that required invisible labor to appear effortless. For several minutes, everyone ate in relative silence. The tension had shifted from hostile to contemplative, as if the Mitchell family was reassessing their initial judgments. Then Charlotte spoke, her voice quieter than it had been all evening. "Garrett, may I ask you something? And I'd like an honest answer." "That seems to be the theme tonight. Do you love my daughter?" Caroline went very still beside him. Garrett set down his fork and considered the question seriously. It would be easy to say yes, easy to give them the romantic answer they probably expected. But he'd promised himself he'd be real this weekend, and that meant being honest even when it was complicated. "I care about her deeply, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. But love, real love, takes more than 3 months to build. It takes seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. It takes time and trust and 1,000 small decisions to keep showing up, even when it's hard." He looked at Caroline, meeting her eyes directly. "What we have is the foundation for that. Whether it becomes love depends on both of us and whether we're willing to do the work. But I can tell you this. I respect her. I admire her. And I want to see where this goes because she makes me believe that good things are still possible." Caroline's eyes were bright with emotion, tears or something close to it. Vivian leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said at this table in years." "Vivian." Charlotte's voice carried warning. "What?" "It's true. When's the last time any of us talked about love as something that requires work, instead of just something that validates our life choices?" She looked around at her family. "Henri and I have been married 6 years. Can any of us say we've built something that honest?" Henri shifted uncomfortably. Preston and Patricia exchanged a look that spoke volumes about conversations they weren't having. Robert set down his silverware with deliberate care. "Love is important, but so is compatibility, shared values, similar life trajectories. Vivian is right that honest emotion matters, but emotion alone doesn't sustain a partnership when practical realities intrude. Then it's a good thing we have more than just emotion." Caroline's voice was steady now, stronger. "Garrett and I understand each other in ways that have nothing to do with money or status. We both know what it means to build something from nothing. We both value integrity over appearance. And we both know what it's like to be judged by people who've never bothered to understand us." The last sentence landed like an indictment. Charlotte's expression tightened. Robert looked at his daughter with something that might have been recognition or regret. "If you feel judged by your own family, sweetheart," Charlotte began. "I do, Mother. Constantly. Every family gathering is a referendum on my life choices. Every conversation includes some subtle reminder that I'm not married, not producing grandchildren, not fitting into the mold you created for me before I was old enough to have opinions about my own life." Robert's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Caroline." "Isn't it? Tell me, Father, when's the last time you asked about my company without suggesting I should sell it or go public or let you acquire it? When's the last time you celebrated my success without comparing it to Preston's?" Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. Preston looked uncomfortable. "Caroline, but..." Preston's voice was careful. "I never asked for those comparisons." "I know you didn't, but they happen anyway." Caroline turned to her brother, and Garrett saw years of complicated sibling dynamics in that look. "You're the golden child, the one who stayed in the family business, married well, produced heirs. You did everything right according to the Mitchell family playbook. And you think I don't pay a price for that?" Preston's voice was sharper than expected. "You think it's easy being the one who has to carry on Father's legacy? The one who can't make a single mistake because it might damage the company, the reputation, the family name?" The siblings stared at each other across the table, and Garrett realized he was watching something that had been building for years finally surface. "I never said it was easy." Caroline's voice was quieter now. "I just said you did it, and they praised you for it, while I built something on my own, and all I've gotten is questions about when I'm going to settle down and live a real life." "Because we worry about you," Charlotte interjected. "You work yourself to exhaustion. You're always alone." "I'm not alone. I have Garrett. I have friends. I have a life that might not look like yours, but it's mine, and it matters." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a blanket. Staff cleared the main course in silence, bringing dessert that Garrett barely registered. Robert was the first to speak again, his voice carrying fatigue beneath its usual authority. "I think we all need to consider what's been said tonight. Clearly, there are issues that have gone unaddressed for too long." "Clearly." Vivian's tone was dry but not unkind. Charlotte looked at her daughter with something that might have been pain. "Caroline, I think we owe you an apology. Several, in fact." "And Garrett," Robert added, surprising everyone. "We haven't exactly welcomed you with open arms." Garrett met the older man's eyes. "I didn't come here expecting open arms. I came because Caroline needed support. You're her family. It's not my place to judge how you navigate those relationships, but I can be honest about what I see, and I won't apologize for defending her when she's being criticized." "We weren't criticizing," Patricia began, but Preston cut her off. "We were. Let's not pretend otherwise." He looked at Garrett with something approaching respect. "You were right about earlier. We were performing, testing you, trying to figure out your angle because none of us could believe someone might just be here without ulterior motives." "That says more about us than it does about you," Vivian added quietly. Dessert was consumed in relative quiet, not the hostile silence from earlier, but something more contemplative. Processing. When Charlotte finally suggested they adjourn to the conservatory for after-dinner drinks, the movement felt less like strategic positioning and more like genuine desire for continued conversation. The conservatory was exactly what Garrett would have expected. Glass enclosed, filled with plants, comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation. The family scattered throughout the space less formally than they had at dinner. Garrett found himself standing near the windows, looking out at the vineyard illuminated by carefully placed lights. Caroline joined him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "Thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For saying what I've been thinking for years. For not backing down. For just being you." "I might have gone too far." "You went exactly far enough." Caroline turned to face him, and in the soft light from the conservatory, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "My family needed to hear those things. I needed them to hear those things from someone who wasn't afraid of their reaction. They're processing. Tomorrow might be worse. Or it might be better. Caroline's smile was tentative. Either way, we survived tonight. From across the room, Robert called out, "Garrett, a word." Caroline's hand tightened on his arm briefly, reassurance or warning, before she let go. Garrett crossed to where Robert stood near a sidebar with expensive scotch. "Drink?" "Sure." Robert poured 2 glasses with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times. He handed one to Garrett, then gestured toward a quiet corner away from the others. "You shook things up tonight. Seems like things needed shaking." Robert took a long sip of his scotch, studying Garrett over the rim of his glass. "My daughter is the most like me of all my children. Same drive, same refusal to quit, same willingness to sacrifice everything for success. That terrifies me." Garrett waited, letting the man talk. "I built everything I have by being ruthless, by calculating every move, by treating relationships as transactions when necessary. It gave me wealth and power and a family that performs for each other instead of connecting." Robert's voice carried something that might have been regret. "Don't make my mistakes, Garrett. Don't let ambition or fear or practical concerns convince you that love is a luxury you can't afford." "I'll keep that in mind." "Do more than keep it in mind." Robert turned to face him fully. "Fight for her, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because my daughter has spent her entire adult life being chosen last. After careers, after social obligations, after more convenient options. If you're going to be with her, you need to break that pattern, consistently, without wavering." The weight of Robert's words settled between them. This wasn't a threat or a test. It was advice from someone who'd seen enough to know what mattered. "I understand." "I hope you do." Robert finished his scotch. "Because tomorrow we'll have a different conversation. One about practicalities and futures and what you're actually prepared to commit to. Tonight was about seeing if you had backbone. Tomorrow will be about seeing if you have staying power." With that, Robert moved away, leaving Garrett standing alone with his scotch and the growing certainty that this weekend was going to demand more from him than he'd anticipated. Caroline found him a few minutes later, and they stood together by the windows, watching the stars emerge over the vineyard. The evening had stripped away layers of pretense, leaving something raw and more honest than either had expected. "What did my father say?" "That tomorrow we talk about practicalities." Caroline's sigh was heavy. "Of course we do." They stayed in the conservatory until the family began drifting off to bed. Charlotte hugged Caroline with what looked like genuine emotion. Preston shook Garrett's hand with new respect. Vivian winked at Caroline in a way that suggested sisterly solidarity Garrett hadn't seen earlier. Walking back to their rooms in the East Wing, Caroline stopped outside her door. "Thank you for tonight. For all of it. We survived round 1. Barely." But she was smiling. "Garrett, what my father said about the acquisition, tomorrow. We'll deal with tomorrow. Caroline nodded, looking relieved. "Good night, Garrett." "Good night, Caroline." He watched her disappear into her room before entering the blue room. The space felt emptier than it had before dinner, or maybe he just felt the weight of everything that had been said and unsaid. Garrett changed into sleep clothes and lay in a bed that was too soft, too expensive, too far removed from his normal life. But as he stared in the ceiling, he wasn't thinking about the bed or the estate, or even the minefield that was the Mitchell family. He was thinking about Caroline's hand on his under the table, the way she'd stood up to defend him, the foundation they were building one honest conversation at a time. And he was thinking about Robert's challenge, fight for her, especially when it's hard, and wondering if he was prepared for exactly how hard it might become. Part 3. fixed version, no double ending. 6 months after that all-night conversation in Caroline's office, the foundation opened its first shop. Garrett stood in the doorway of Amanda Reeves's garage in Salem, watching her help an elderly man whose transmission had given up after 200,000 faithful miles. The dealer had quoted him $3,500. Amanda quoted $800. The old man's hands shook as he counted out cash from an envelope. I can keep my job now. My grandson, he depends on me to pick him up from school. Amanda's smile was genuine, not the polished customer service version. That's what we're here for, Mr. Chen. Real help for real people. Caroline stood beside Garrett, her hand finding his without looking. They'd spent the past months building this, restructuring her company with Lauren as COO, training mechanics who shared Garrett's philosophy, pitching donors who believed fairness and profit could coexist. Robert had invested $2 million in seed funding, not as a controlling father, but as someone who'd finally understood what mattered. Charlotte sat on the board, bringing connections to philanthropic circles. Preston helped navigate legal structures. Vivian championed their cause in European fundraising networks, telling their story to wealthy donors who'd never considered auto repair as social justice. But watching Amanda hand those keys back to Mr. Chen, seeing relief transform the old man's face, that was the moment everything became real. Garrett felt something shift in his chest, a tightness that wasn't pain, but expansion. This was purpose beyond keeping his own shop running. This was his values amplified across communities, his belief that good work and fair prices weren't mutually exclusive, proving itself in someone else's hands. Caroline squeezed his hand. You okay? Better than okay. This is what it looks like when you build something that matters. They drove back to Portland as evening painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Caroline was quieter than usual, checking her phone at stoplights with the intensity of someone avoiding a conversation. Finally, Garrett asked, "What's wrong?" Lauren called. She wants to buy Mitchell Tech Solutions. Full acquisition. She'd run it. I'd consult part-time, maybe 20 hours a week. Caroline's voice was carefully neutral. It would give me freedom to focus entirely on the foundation if I wanted. What do you want? I don't know. The company was my proof that I could build something without family help. Selling feels like giving up, even though I know it's not. She glanced at him. What do you think? I think you already know the answer. You're just scared to say it out loud. Caroline pulled into his apartment complex. She still kept her place downtown, but she'd been staying at his more often than not. They climbed the stairs in silence, the weight of unspoken decisions pressing between them. Inside, she finally spoke. I want to sell. Because you're right. The company was never the point. It was proving I could succeed without them. But I've proven that. Lauren would run it beautifully. And the foundation could be something extraordinary if I gave it my full attention. So sell. Just like that? Garrett pulled her close, feeling the tension in her shoulders. Not just like that. Like this. You've built something valuable enough that your COO wants to buy it. You've proven everything you set out to prove. And now you're choosing impact over ego. That's not giving up. That's evolution. Caroline buried her face in his chest. I'm terrified I'll regret it. Maybe you will. But staying out of fear is worse than leaving with purpose. 2 months later, Caroline sold Mitchell Tech Solutions to Lauren for $15 million. She cried signing the papers, not from sadness, but from the weight of letting go. Then she transferred $10 million to the foundation's endowment, ensuring it could survive even if fundraising slowed. With the rest, she and Garrett bought a house. Nothing ostentatious, just a 3-bedroom in a Portland suburb with a yard and a garage Garrett could actually use. They moved in on a rainy Thursday, hauling boxes and furniture with help from Frank, Jack, and Sarah from the shop. Caroline's expensive downtown apartment furniture looked wrong in the modest space, too polished for the worn hardwood floors. They sold most of it and bought pieces that felt more like them, comfortable, functional, honest. That night, they sat on the floor of their empty living room, eating pizza from the box because they hadn't unpacked plates yet. I keep waiting to panic about the company. Caroline wiped grease from her fingers. But I just feel light. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot what it felt like to put it down. That's called relief. Is it always this quiet? Garrett laughed. You're not used to quiet. Give it time. You'll learn to love it. But quiet didn't last long. A week after they moved in, Derek Morrison's lawsuit hit. Caroline's phone rang at 7 in the morning, her lawyer's voice tight with controlled panic. Caroline, we have a problem. Derek Morrison is suing Mitchell Tech Solutions for breach of contract, negligence, and professional malpractice. He's claiming $10 million in damages. The coffee mug in Caroline's hand trembled. Garrett took it from her before it spilled. On what grounds? We exceeded every contractual obligation. His claim is that recommendations you made caused his company financial harm. It's baseless, but he has expensive lawyers and a narrative about a small tech consultant overstepping expertise. After the call ended, Caroline sat at their kitchen table, face pale. This could destroy everything. My reputation, Lauren's company, the foundation's credibility if it looks like I'm using it to hide from legal problems. Garrett poured fresh coffee, his mind already working through options. What does Lauren think? She wants to settle. Pay Derek $2 million to make it go away. Caroline's voice cracked. But that's letting him win. Letting him think he can punish me for rejecting him and get away with it. Then we fight. Fighting could take years, cost more than settling, and the publicity will be worse if you settle. It looks like admission of guilt. Garrett sat across from her, his voice steady. We expose this for what it is. Retaliation, not legitimate dispute. You have documentation. You have witnesses to his behavior. You have integrity on your side. He has money and connections. So do you. Your brother's a lawyer with connections. Your father knows every power player in the state. And you have something Derek doesn't. You're telling the truth. Over the next week, they built their case methodically. Caroline's meticulous records showed the company had exceeded every deliverable. Email trails documented Derek's inappropriate advances, his proposition, her professional rejections. Most damaging, Garrett tracked down Derek's ex-wife through professional networks and old business contacts. Diane Morrison agreed to meet them at a coffee shop downtown. She was 43, polished but tired, with eyes that had seen too much. I should have known someone would finally call him out. Derek has a pattern. Any woman who rejects him, business or personal, he finds a way to destroy. I have 3 other contacts willing to testify to the same thing. Preston used his connections to feed information to business journalists, not directly but through careful channels. Within days, articles appeared questioning Derek's lawsuit, noting his company's pre-existing financial troubles, highlighting other allegations of retaliation against women who'd rejected his advances. Faced with countersuits for defamation and sexual harassment, media scrutiny, and witnesses willing to testify to his pattern of behavior, Derek's lawyers advised him to drop the case. He issued a public apology written by legal teams desperate to contain the damage. In their kitchen, Caroline read the apology email 3 times before speaking. I almost let him intimidate me into settling, into being small again. But you didn't. We didn't. Garrett pulled her close. That's what partnership means. Fighting together for what's right. The victory should have felt sweet, but Caroline's exhaustion ran deeper than one lawsuit. The stress had revealed something they'd both been avoiding, the toll of building a life from scratch while carrying the weight of family expectations and public identity. 3 months later, they sat in couples therapy, Caroline's idea, though Garrett had agreed immediately. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "What are you most afraid of in this relationship?" Caroline answered first, "That I'll wake up one day and resent Garrett for not understanding the pressure I'm under. That he'll grow tired of my complications. That I'll prove my mother right. That I'm too damaged to sustain a healthy partnership." Garrett's throat tightened. "I'm afraid I'll hold her back. That she'll realize she could have someone who fits her world better. Someone who doesn't need explanations about why board meetings matter or what acquisition strategies mean. Someone who isn't broken from losing his first wife." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "You're both describing fears about inadequacy. But what I'm hearing underneath is that you're terrified of being truly seen and then rejected. You, Caroline, have spent your life performing competence, and you, Garrett, have spent years building walls. This relationship requires you both to be vulnerable. That's terrifying." Over the following months, they learned to name the fear instead of avoiding it. Caroline learned to ask for help instead of proving she didn't need it. Garrett learned to accept support without seeing it as weakness. They fought, real fights about time and priorities and the invisible labor of maintaining a relationship. But they also learned to repair, to come back together instead of retreating. A year after the foundation's first shop opened, they had 12 locations across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, 3,500 people served, 45 mechanics employed, $2.8 million in services provided at prices people could afford. Garrett split his time, half at his original shop where Frank now handled most management, half mentoring new foundation mechanics. Caroline worked 30 hours weekly on foundation strategy and fundraising, consulting occasionally for Lauren but mostly leaving the company in capable hands. They'd found a rhythm that worked at most days. The proposal came on a Friday evening in early fall, exactly 1 year after they'd met. Garrett had planned to take Caroline back to the vineyard, propose at the Mitchell estate where everything had started. He'd gotten Robert's blessing weeks earlier, bought a ring that felt right. Simple platinum band with a modest diamond. Nothing like the ostentatious engagement ring he'd given Claire years ago. But then Derek's lawsuit had hit, and the timing felt wrong. Then Caroline's stress levels peaked during foundation expansion, and the timing felt wrong again. Then his own doubts crept in. Was he enough for someone building something this significant? Robert called him on a Tuesday. "Stop overthinking it. Life will always throw crises. The question is whether you face them together or separately." That Friday, Garrett picked up Caroline from a foundation meeting. "We're going somewhere." "Where?" "You'll see." The drive to Willamette Valley took 2 hours through autumn vineyards turning gold and crimson. Caroline was quiet, checking her phone less than usual, just watching the landscape roll past. When they pulled through the gates of Mitchell Estate, her head turned sharply. "What are we doing here?" "Your family's inside, but I asked them to give us an hour first." He led her to the overlook where they'd stood that first night, where she'd admitted she was always alone with her family, where he'd promised to figure things out together. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber. Caroline's face was backlit, making her look simultaneously young and ancient with accumulated wisdom. Garrett took her hands. "1 year ago, you walked into my shop and asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend. You said you needed someone real." "I remember. I said yes because I recognized loneliness in you, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see what they want instead of who you are. I thought I was helping you survive a weekend with your family." He paused, pulling out the ring box. Caroline's breath caught. "But you ended up changing my entire life. You taught me that caring about someone is worth the risk. You showed me that my values could have impact beyond my shop. You made me believe that good things were still possible after I'd convinced myself otherwise. Opening the box, he continued, I'm not asking you to marry me because we've reached some milestone or because it's what people expect. I'm asking because you're the person I want to choose every day. Because building a life with you, messy and complicated and beautifully imperfect, is the best thing I've ever done. Caroline's tears were already falling. Garrett, wait, I need you to know this isn't conditional. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your ambitions. I'm asking you to let me support those ambitions while building something that's ours. And if you need more time, or if this isn't what you want, that's okay too. I'll still choose you tomorrow. Yes. The word came out choked. God, yes. Of course, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and she kissed him like she was trying to memorize the moment through physical sensation. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. I was terrified you'd realize I'm too much work. You are too much work. So am I. That's what makes it worth it. The family emerged from the house then, Robert and Charlotte, Preston and Patricia, Vivian with her new accountant husband, Marcus. They'd been watching from the windows, Charlotte admitted later, unable to resist witnessing the moment. Champagne appeared. Toasts were offered. Charlotte hugged Caroline with genuine emotion. Robert shook Garrett's hand and said quietly, Welcome to the family. Officially. 6 months later, they married at a boutique vineyard venue that belonged to neither family. Neutral territory, as Caroline called it. 150 guests watched them exchange vows they'd written themselves, promises about showing up and choosing each other and building something meaningful. The ceremony was simple, elegant. Preston stood beside Garrett as best man. Vivian held Caroline's bouquet. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett pulled Caroline close and kissed her. Not the careful kiss of performance, but something real and deep and full of promise. The reception unfolded in a converted barn transformed with string lights and simple elegance. Robert's toast made people cry. 3 years ago, my daughter brought home a mechanic, and I thought she'd lost her mind. A man with oil under his fingernails, no interest in wealth or status, completely unimpressed by everything we'd spent our lives building. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. I was wrong. Garrett didn't need to be impressed by what we'd built because he understood something we'd forgotten. That the greatest wealth in the world has nothing to do with money. It's about showing up when you have nothing to gain. It's about choosing people over profit. It's about building a life that matters. Amanda Reeves spoke about how the foundation had saved her business and dignity simultaneously. Vivian talked about watching her sister choose authenticity, how it had given her courage to do the same. Late in the evening, Garrett and Caroline stepped outside for air. The barn was warm with celebration, but they needed a moment alone. We did it. Caroline's voice was full of wonder. We did. They kissed under stars that seemed brighter than usual, two people who'd found each other through an improbable request and built something that mattered. 5 years later, the foundation held its anniversary gala. 300 people packed an event space overlooking the Willamette River. Donors, mechanics, families helped, employees. Caroline was visibly pregnant now, 6 months along with their second daughter. Their first, Claire, was 3 years old, left at home with Robert and Charlotte, who'd become devoted grandparents. Garrett stood at the podium. 5 years ago, the woman who would become my wife walked into my shop asking for help. She needed someone real in a world of performance. I agreed because I recognized loneliness in her, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see what they want instead of who you are. His voice strengthened. We built this foundation on one principle. Everyone deserves help. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's how we show up for each other. Tonight we're celebrating 23 shops, 8,500 people served, and mechanics who believe good work and fair prices aren't mutually exclusive. Caroline spoke next, rising carefully. 5 years ago, I thought success meant bigger revenue, more growth, constant expansion. Today, success means knowing I helped someone keep their car running so they could get to work, get their kids to school, live their lives with dignity. After speeches and applause, they stood on a balcony overlooking the river. City lights reflected on dark water, the evening carrying a hint of rain. "Do you ever regret it?" Caroline's question was soft. "Saying yes to that crazy request? Getting involved in my family's chaos?" Garrett pulled her close, careful of her belly. "Not once. Not even on the hardest days." "Why not?" He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Because you helped me understand something important. The greatest wealth in the world is showing up for people when you have nothing to gain. Everything else is just details." Caroline kissed him as the city stretched below, full of people whose cars would break down, who would need help, who would find their way to foundation shops run by mechanics believing that fairness and quality could coexist. Inside, their family and friends celebrated. Robert and Charlotte, transformed by time and grandchildren. Preston and Patricia, learning to talk honestly. Vivian and Marcus, building something real. Frank, Jack, and Sarah from the shop. Amanda Reeves and dozens of foundation mechanics. Lauren, running Mitchell Tech with the same values Caroline had instilled. The foundation was their legacy, proof that values could scale, that one person's kindness could multiply across communities, that you didn't have to change who you were to make larger impact. But their real legacy stood between them. The choice to build something honest when performance would have been easier, to risk vulnerability when armor was safer. To believe that being truly seen was worth the danger of being truly known. Rain began falling on the balcony above them, washing the city clean. Tomorrow would come with all its complications and opportunities. Their daughter would be born in 3 months. The foundation would continue growing, 50 shops, 100, expanding across the country. Caroline would write her book about why this mattered. Claire would grow up visiting Daddy's shop, learning that dignity and fairness weren't luxuries but necessities. They would face challenges neither could predict: economic downturns, family health scares, the ordinary struggles of maintaining love across decades. But tonight, standing on a balcony overlooking Portland, Garrett and Caroline held each other and felt the weight of what they'd built. Not perfect, not finished, but real and meaningful and worth every risk they'd taken. The greatest wealth in the world, indeed. Part 3, fixed version, full length, 6,800 plus words. 6 months after that all-night conversation in Caroline's office, the foundation opened its first shop. Garrett stood in the doorway of Amanda Reeves' garage in Salem, watching her help an elderly man whose transmission had given up after 200,000 faithful miles. The dealer had quoted him $3,500. Amanda quoted $800. The old man's hands shook as he counted out cash from an envelope. "I can keep my job now. My grandson, he depends on me to pick him up from school." Amanda's smile was genuine, not the polished customer service version. "That's what we're here for, Mr. Chen. Real help for real people." Caroline stood beside Garrett, her hand finding his without looking. They'd spent the past months building this, restructuring her company with Lauren as COO, training mechanics who shared Garrett's philosophy, pitching donors who believed fairness and profit could coexist. Robert had invested $2 million in seed funding, not as a controlling father, but as someone who'd finally understood what mattered. Charlotte sat on the board, bringing connections to philanthropic circles that had previously seemed impenetrable. Preston helped navigate legal structures, using his experience running his father's West Coast operations to ensure the foundation's compliance was airtight. Vivian championed their cause in European fundraising networks, telling their story to wealthy donors who'd never considered auto repair as social justice. The journey to this moment had been harder than either anticipated. Finding mechanics who shared Garrett's philosophy wasn't just about technical skill. It required people who understood that dignity and fairness weren't obstacles to profit, but foundations for sustainable business. Amanda had been the third candidate they'd interviewed, and the first who'd made Garrett's instincts say yes. She was 38, former military mechanic who'd served 2 tours before coming home to raise 2 kids as a single parent. Her shop had been struggling because she refused to exploit customers even when it meant eating into her own margins. The foundation's model gave her breathing room, fair compensation for her expertise, support for maintaining equipment, and a network of other mechanics facing similar challenges. But watching Amanda hand those keys back to Mr. Chen, seeing relief transform the old man's face, that was the moment everything became real. This wasn't just theory or business plan anymore. This was someone's grandfather getting to keep his job, keep his dignity, keep his independence. Garrett felt something shift in his chest, a tightness that wasn't pain, but expansion. This was purpose beyond keeping his own shop running. This was his values amplified across communities, his belief that good work and fair prices weren't mutually exclusive, proving itself in someone else's hands. Caroline squeezed his hand. "You okay?" "Better than okay. This is what it looks like when you build something that matters." Mr. Chen turned before leaving, his weathered face earnest. "You people, what you're doing here, it's more than just cars. You're helping folks keep their lives running. That's something special." After he left, Amanda walked over to where they stood. "I was going to close next month. Couldn't compete with the chains, couldn't exploit people to stay afloat. You gave me a third option I didn't know existed." Garrett saw tears in her eyes. "You gave yourself that option by refusing to compromise who you are. We just made it sustainable." They drove back to Portland as evening painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Caroline was quieter than usual, checking her phone at stoplights with the intensity of someone avoiding a conversation. Finally, Garrett asked, "What's wrong?" "Lauren called. She wants to buy Mitchell Tech Solutions. Full acquisition. She'd run it. I'd consult part-time, maybe 20 hours a week." Caroline's voice was carefully neutral. "It would give me freedom to focus entirely on the foundation if I wanted." "What do you want?" "I don't know. The company was my proof that I could build something without family help. Selling feels like giving up, even though I know it's not." She glanced at him, vulnerability flickering across her face. "What do you think?" "I think you already know the answer. You're just scared to say it out loud." Caroline pulled into his apartment complex. She still kept her place downtown, but she'd been staying at his more often than not. The spaces between them were shrinking, their lives interweaving in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. They climbed the stairs in silence, the weight of unspoken decisions pressing between them. Inside, she finally spoke. "I want to sell. Because you're right. The company was never the point. It was proving I could succeed without them. But I've proven that. Lauren would run it beautifully. And the foundation could be something extraordinary if I gave it my full attention." "So, sell." "Just like that?" Garrett pulled her close, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "Not just like that. Like this, you've built something valuable enough that your COO wants to buy it. You've proven everything you set out to prove, and now you're choosing impact over ego. That's not giving up. That's evolution." Caroline buried her face in his chest. "I'm terrified I'll regret it." "Maybe you will, but staying out of fear is worse than leaving with purpose." The decision, once made, moved quickly. 2 months later, Caroline sat in a conference room surrounded by lawyers, signing papers that transferred ownership of Mitchell Tech Solutions to Lauren for $15 million. The number was fair, slightly below market value because Caroline insisted on provisions protecting her employees, ensuring their stock options vested fully, guaranteeing their positions for at least 2 years. Lauren signed with hands that trembled slightly. "I'll take care of them, and I'll take care of what you built." "I know you will. That's why I'm selling to you." Caroline cried in the parking garage afterward, not from sadness but from the weight of letting go. Garrett held her while she shook, saying nothing because sometimes silence was the only appropriate response to grief and relief mixing in equal measure. That evening, they met with the foundation's board to announce Caroline's decision. $10 million would go into the endowment, ensuring the foundation could survive even if fundraising slowed. The remaining $5 million would fund their life. A house, security, the freedom to focus on work that mattered without constantly calculating financial risk. Robert listened to the announcement with something like pride. "You're doing what I never had the courage to do. Choosing meaning over empire. I learned from watching your mistakes." Caroline's voice was gentle, not cruel. "And from watching you try to correct them." They bought a house on a rainy Thursday. 3 bedrooms in a Portland suburb with a yard that needed work and a garage Garrett could actually use for projects. It was nothing like Caroline's sleek downtown apartment or the Mitchell Estates' grandeur. It was theirs, built for living rather than impressing. Moving day brought Frank, Jack, and Sarah from the shop, hauling boxes and furniture while trading stories and jokes that made Caroline laugh until her sides hurt. Preston and Patricia showed up with their kids, the teenagers complaining, but helping anyway. Vivian and Marcus flew in from Boston, where his accounting firm had recently transferred them. Caroline's expensive furniture looked wrong in the modest space. Too polished for worn hardwood floors, too formal for rooms meant for comfort rather than display. They sold most of it and bought pieces that felt more like them, a couch deep enough to disappear into, a kitchen table large enough for family dinners, bed frames that prioritized sleep over aesthetic. That night, they sat on the floor of their empty living room, eating pizza from the box because they hadn't unpacked plates yet. "I keep waiting to panic about the company." Caroline wiped grease from her fingers. "But I just feel light. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot what it felt like to put it down." "That's called relief." "Is it always this quiet?" Garrett laughed. "You're not used to quiet. Give it time. You'll learn to love it." But quiet didn't last long. A week after they moved in, Derek Morrison's lawsuit hit like a grenade through their front door. Caroline's phone rang at 7 in the morning, her lawyer's voice tight with controlled panic. "Caroline, we have a problem. Derek Morrison is suing Mitchell Tech Solutions for breach of contract, negligence, and professional malpractice. He's claiming $10 million in damages." The coffee mug in Caroline's hand trembled. Garrett took it from her before it spilled, his mechanic's hands steady even as his mind raced through implications. "On what grounds? We exceeded every contractual obligation." "His claim is that recommendations you made caused his company financial harm. It's baseless, but he has expensive lawyers and a narrative about a small tech consultant overstepping expertise. And Caroline, the timing is suspicious. He filed 3 days after your sale to Lauren went public." After the call ended, Caroline sat at their kitchen table, face pale as morning light. "This could destroy everything. My reputation, Lauren's company, the foundation's credibility if it looks like I'm using it to hide from legal problems." Garrett poured fresh coffee, his mind already working through options. "What does Lauren think?" "She wants to settle. Pay Derek $2 million to make it go away." Caroline's voice cracked. "But that's letting him win. Letting him think he can punish me for rejecting him and get away with it. Then we fight." "Fighting could take years, cost more than settling, and the publicity, every article will mention the foundation, will make it look like we built something to launder reputation." "The publicity will be worse if you settle. It looks like admission of guilt." Garrett sat across from her, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. We expose this for what it is. Retaliation, not legitimate dispute. You have documentation. You have witnesses to his behavior. You have integrity on your side. He has money and connections. So do you. Your brother's a lawyer with connections. Your father knows every power player in the state. And you have something Derek doesn't. You're telling the truth. Over the next week, they built their case methodically. Caroline's meticulous records showed the company had exceeded every deliverable, often going beyond contractual requirements. Email trails documented Derek's inappropriate advances, his proposition disguised as business opportunity. Her professional rejections that maintained courtesy while establishing clear boundaries. Most damaging, Garrett tracked down Derek's ex-wife through professional networks and old business contacts. It took 3 days of phone calls and careful diplomacy, but finally Diane Morrison agreed to meet them at a coffee shop downtown. She was 43, polished but tired, with eyes that had seen too much and learned to trust too little. I should have known someone would finally call him out. Derek has a pattern. Any woman who rejects him, business or personal, he finds a way to destroy. I have 3 other contacts willing to testify to the same thing. Why didn't you? Caroline's question was gentle, not accusatory. Because I had kids to protect and a divorce settlement with a non-disclosure clause. Diane's smile was bitter. But that NDA doesn't cover factual testimony in legal proceedings. Derek's lawyers forgot that loophole. Preston used his connections to feed information to business journalists, not directly but through careful channels that protected everyone involved. Within days, articles appeared questioning Derek's lawsuit, noting his company's pre-existing financial troubles that predated his work with Mitchell Tech, highlighting other allegations of retaliation against women who'd rejected his advances. The pressure mounted. More women came forward, not to join the lawsuit but to provide context, a pattern of behavior stretching back years. Derek's company's stock price dropped. Board members started asking uncomfortable questions. Faced with countersuits for defamation and sexual harassment, media scrutiny that wouldn't fade, and witnesses willing to testify under oath to his pattern of behavior, Derek's lawyers advised him to drop the case. He issued a public apology written by legal teams desperate to contain the damage, carefully worded to admit nothing while appearing contrite. In their kitchen, Caroline read the apology email 3 times before speaking. I almost let him intimidate me into settling, into being small again. But you didn't. We didn't. Garrett pulled her close. That's what partnership means, fighting together for what's right. The victory should have felt sweet, but Caroline's exhaustion ran deeper than one lawsuit. The stress had revealed something they'd both been avoiding, the toll of building a life from scratch while carrying the weight of family expectations, public identity, and their own fears of inadequacy. 3 months later, they sat in couples therapy. Caroline's idea, though Garrett had agreed immediately. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was a woman in her 50s with the kind of calm that suggested she'd heard everything and been surprised by nothing. She asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. What are you most afraid of in this relationship? Caroline answered first, her voice small in the quiet office. That I'll wake up one day and resent Garrett for not understanding the pressure I'm under. That he'll grow tired of my complications. That I'll prove my mother right. That I'm too damaged to sustain a healthy partnership. Garrett's throat tightened. I'm afraid I'll hold her back. That she'll realize she could have someone who fits her world better, someone who doesn't need explanations about why board meetings matter or what acquisition strategies mean. Someone who isn't broken from losing his first wife. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. You're both describing fears about inadequacy, but what I'm hearing underneath is that you're terrified of being truly seen and then rejected. You, Caroline, have spent your life performing competence, and you, Garrett, have spent years building walls. This relationship requires you both to be vulnerable. That's terrifying. So what do we do? Caroline's question carried desperation. You practice. You name the fear instead of avoiding it. You ask for what you need instead of pretending you don't need anything. You fail at it sometimes, and you try again. Dr. Martinez smiled. Love isn't a destination. It's a practice. Over the following months, they learned, Caroline learned to ask for help instead of proving she didn't need it. Garrett learned to accept support without seeing it as weakness. They fought, real fights about time and priorities and the invisible labor of maintaining a relationship, but they also learned to repair, to come back together instead of retreating to separate corners. The foundation grew steadily. By the one-year anniversary of that first shop opening, they had 12 locations across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. 3,500 people served, 45 mechanics employed, $2.8 million in services provided at prices people could afford. Garrett split his time, half at his original shop where Frank now handled most management, half mentoring new foundation mechanics. He discovered he loved teaching, loved seeing people's faces when they realized they could do good work and make good money without exploiting anyone. Caroline worked 30 hours weekly on foundation strategy and fundraising, consulting occasionally for Lauren, but mostly leaving the company in capable hands. They'd found a rhythm that worked, most days. But Garrett carried a secret in his pocket. A small velvet box with a ring that felt right, simple platinum band with a modest diamond, nothing like the ostentatious engagement ring he'd given Claire years ago. The proposal had been planned for months, back to the vineyard, the Mitchell estate, where everything had started. Robert's blessing obtained weeks earlier in a conversation that had been easier than Garrett expected. About time you asked. Robert had smiled. I was starting to worry you'd lost your nerve. But then Derek's lawsuit hit, and the timing felt wrong. Then Caroline's stress levels peaked during foundation expansion, and the timing felt wrong again. Then his own doubts crept in. Was he enough for someone building something this significant? Would she say yes, or realize she'd be better off with someone who understood her world without translation? Robert called him on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the planned proposal. Stop overthinking it. Life will always throw crises. The question is whether you face them together or separately. That Friday, exactly 1 year after Caroline had walked into his shop, Garrett picked her up from a foundation meeting. We're going somewhere. Where? You'll see. The drive to Willamette Valley took 2 hours through autumn vineyards turning gold and crimson. Caroline was quiet, checking her phone less than usual, just watching the landscape roll past. She'd been different lately, softer somehow, less armored, as if therapy and time and trust had slowly dissolved some of the walls she'd spent years building. When they pulled through the gates of Mitchell Estate, her head turned sharply. What are we doing here? Your family's inside, but I asked them to give us an hour first. He led her to the overlook where they'd stood that first night, where she'd admitted she was always alone with her family, where he'd promised to figure things out together. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Caroline's face was backlit, making her look simultaneously young and ancient with accumulated wisdom. Garrett took her hands. They were cold, despite the mild evening. 1 year ago, you walked into my shop and asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend. You said you needed someone real. I remember. I said yes because I recognized loneliness in you. The kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see what they want instead of who you are. I thought I was helping you survive a weekend with your family. He paused, pulling out the ring box. Caroline's breath caught, her eyes going wide. But you ended up changing my entire life. You taught me that caring about someone is worth the risk. You showed me that my values could have impact beyond my shop. You made me believe that good things were still possible after I'd convinced myself otherwise. Opening the box, he continued, his voice thick with emotion he'd stopped trying to hide. I'm not asking you to marry me because we've reached some milestone or because it's what people expect. I'm asking because you're the person I want to choose every day. Because building a life with you, messy and complicated and beautifully imperfect, is the best thing I've ever done." Caroline was already crying, tears tracking down her face in the fading light. "Garrett, wait. I need you to know this isn't conditional. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your ambitions. I'm asking you to let me support those ambitions while building something that's ours. And if you need more time, or if this isn't what you want, that's okay too. I'll still choose you tomorrow." "Yes." The word came out choked, barely audible. "God, yes. Of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly because he'd stolen one of her rings months ago to get the size right. And she kissed him like she was trying to memorize the moment through physical sensation. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. "I was terrified you'd realize I'm too much work." "You are too much work. So am I. That's what makes it worth it." The family emerged from the house then. Robert and Charlotte, Preston and Patricia with their teenagers, Vivian and Marcus. They'd been watching from the windows, Charlotte admitted later, unable to resist witnessing the moment their family had been quietly hoping for. Champagne appeared as if by magic. Toasts were offered with genuine warmth rather than performative courtesy. Charlotte hugged Caroline with an emotion that seemed to surprise them both. Robert shook Garrett's hand and said quietly, "Welcome to the family. Officially." 6 months later, they married at a boutique vineyard venue an hour south of Portland. Neutral territory, as Caroline called it. A place that belonged to neither family, just to them. 150 guests filled white chairs facing a simple arch covered in climbing roses. Garrett stood at the front with Preston beside him, wearing a suit that fit better than anything he'd owned before Caroline entered his life. His hands were steady, his breathing even, but his chest carried a weight he hadn't expected, the magnitude of what he was about to promise. Preston leaned close. "You know, I spent my whole life doing what was expected. You taught me it's possible to choose differently. Don't forget that today." The music changed. Everyone stood. And there she was. Caroline walked down the aisle alone. She'd insisted on that. No father giving her away like property changing hands. Just her. Choosing this, choosing him, with every step. She wore a dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, her hair half up in a style that looked effortlessly beautiful. But it was her face that stopped Garrett's breath, the mixture of joy and terror and absolute certainty that mirrored everything he felt. When she reached him, she handed her bouquet to Vivian and took his hands. Her fingers were trembling slightly. "Hi." Her voice was barely audible. "Hi yourself." The officiant, a family friend, not clergy because neither of them wanted religious ceremony, began speaking about partnership and commitment and the courage required to truly see another person. But Garrett was only half listening. He was too focused on Caroline's eyes, on the way her hands gripped his like an anchor. Then came the vows. They'd written their own, against Charlotte's gentle protests about tradition. Garrett went first. "Caroline, I promise to choose you every day, to support your ambitions without trying to control them, to be honest even when it's uncomfortable, to show up, especially when it's hard, to remind you that you're enough as you are, enough in your success, enough in your strength, enough to be loved exactly as you exist." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. She took a shaky breath before speaking. "Garrett, I promise to let you in, to make space for us in my life, to remember that partnership means asking for help, to choose hope over fear, and to build a life measured by meaning, not metrics. To trust that being seen and known is worth the risk of being hurt. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Garrett pulled Caroline close and kissed her, not the careful kiss of performance, but something real and deep and full of promise. Caroline laughed against his mouth, and he felt the sound reverberate through his chest. The reception unfolded in a converted barn transformed with string lights and simple elegance. Long tables encouraged conversation rather than hierarchy. The mix of Caroline's polished world and Garrett's unpretentious one blended better than anyone had expected. Foundation mechanics trading stories with former tech executives, family members laughing with shop employees, wealth and work ethic, finding common ground. Robert's toast came after everyone had been served their first course. He stood at the head table, glass raised, and for a moment looked older than his 62 years, tired maybe, or just honest in a way he'd avoided for decades. 3 years ago, my daughter brought home a mechanic. I thought she'd lost her mind. Quiet laughter rippled through the crowd. A man with oil under his fingernails, no interest in wealth or status, completely unimpressed by everything we'd spent our lives building. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Regret, mixing with pride. I was wrong. Garrett didn't need to be impressed by what we'd built because he understood something we'd forgotten. That the greatest wealth in the world has nothing to do with money. It's about showing up when you have nothing to gain. It's about choosing people over profit. It's about building a life that matters. Robert's voice grew thick. To Garrett, who taught us to see clearly. To Caroline, who had the courage to demand better from all of us. And to the life they're building together. One honest choice at a time. Everyone drank. Several people were crying, including Charlotte. Amanda Reeves spoke next. I was a single mom struggling to keep my business afloat while charging fair prices. Garrett and Caroline didn't just change my life. They showed me it's possible to do good work and make a good living. They proved that kindness isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's how you build something that lasts. More applause. More tears. Vivian surprised everyone by standing without being called. My sister showed me what real love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but authentic. I'm sorry it took me so many years to see it, but watching Caroline and Garrett, her voice caught. They saved me from a life that was empty. Thank you both. The first dance wasn't a waltz. Caroline had chosen something contemporary, and they moved together with the awkward grace of people who cared more about the moment than the performance. Garrett held her close, felt her heartbeat against his chest. We did it. Caroline's whisper was full of wonder. We did. Thank you for saying yes, that first day in your shop. Thank you for asking. The evening flowed like good wine. Toasts and laughter, dancing and conversation, the blending of two worlds that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Frank and Jack traded stories with Caroline's executives about the differences between fixing cars and fixing systems, finding surprising common ground in the challenge of solving problems with limited resources. Charlotte and Robert danced together with a tenderness Garrett hadn't seen before. Charlotte's head resting on Robert's shoulder as they swayed to music that was probably too contemporary for their taste, but perfect for the moment. Preston and Patricia held hands at their table, occasionally leaning close to whisper things that made them both smile. The kind of intimacy that came from years together and the conscious choice to keep choosing each other. Late in the evening, after most guests had departed, Garrett found himself outside with Robert. Both held cigars they weren't really smoking, just using as excuse for quiet. You're good for her. Robert's voice carried no challenge this time, just acknowledgement. She's good for you too. That's how it should work. Your wife said something similar. Catherine's smarter than me. Always has been. Robert looked up at the stars. We almost lost each other a dozen times over the years. We survived because we kept choosing each other, even when it would have been easier not to. That's what Caroline and I are committing to. I know. I can see it. Robert turned to face him. I'm proud of you both, for building something real, for showing the rest of us what we'd forgotten matters. They stood in comfortable silence until Caroline appeared in the doorway, backlit by barn lights, looking for Garrett with her eyes. Go on. Robert's smile was genuine. Your wife needs you. Needs. The word wife sent a thrill through Garrett's chest, new and precious and terrifying in its permanence. 5 years later, the foundation held its anniversary gala. The event space overlooking the Willamette River was packed with 300 people, donors in expensive suits mingling with mechanics in their best clothes, families who'd been helped sharing space with foundation employees, wealth and need recognizing their interdependence. Caroline was visibly pregnant now, 6 months along with their second daughter. Their first, Claire, was 3 years old, left at home with Robert and Charlotte, who'd transformed into devoted grandparents in ways that still surprised everyone. The past 5 years had been extraordinary. The foundation had grown to 23 shops across 6 states. 8,500 people served annually, 123 mechanics employed, nearly $8 million in services provided at prices that preserved dignity instead of exploiting desperation. Caroline had sold her remaining consulting stake in Mitchell Tech completely, using the funds to expand the foundation's endowment. She now worked full-time on strategy and fundraising, having discovered that building something with clear social impact satisfied her in ways profit-driven work never had. Garrett had stepped back from daily shop operations entirely, with Frank now owning 49% of Hale's Auto Repair and managing everything. Garrett focused on mentoring new foundation mechanics, teaching not just technical skills but the philosophy that underpinned everything they did: fairness, honesty, dignity. Their daughter Claire was already asking when she could work in Daddy's shop, already showing signs of inheriting both parents' stubbornness and compassion in equal measure. Garrett stood at the podium, more comfortable speaking publicly than he'd ever expected to become. The crowd quieted as he began. 5 years ago, the woman who would become my wife walked into my shop asking for help. She needed someone real in a world of performance. I agreed because I recognized loneliness in her, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see what they want instead of who you are. He found Caroline in the front row, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, the other holding a glass of sparkling water. I thought I was helping her survive one weekend with her family. Instead, she changed everything. She taught me that caring about someone is worth the risk. She showed me my values could scale beyond my shop. She made me believe good things were still possible. His voice strengthened. We built this foundation on one principle: everyone deserves help. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's how we show up for each other. Tonight, we're celebrating 23 shops, 8,500 people served annually, and mechanics who believe good work and fair prices aren't mutually exclusive. Caroline spoke next, rising carefully. Pregnancy had softened some of her edges, made her more willing to show vulnerability in public spaces. 5 years ago, I thought success meant bigger revenue, more growth, constant expansion. Today, success means knowing I helped someone keep their car running so they could get to work, get their kids to school, live their lives with dignity. She paused, looking around the room at faces representing every part of their journey. Garrett taught me something I'd forgotten: that the greatest wealth in the world has nothing to do with money. It's about showing up when you have nothing to gain. It's about choosing people over profit. It's about building a life that matters. After speeches and applause, after dinner and dancing, and the slow dispersal of guests into the Portland night, Garrett and Caroline stood on a balcony overlooking the river. City lights reflected on dark water, the evening carrying a hint of rain that would arrive by morning. "Do you ever regret it?" Caroline's question was soft, almost lost in the sounds of the city below. "Saying yes to that crazy request? Getting involved in my family's chaos?" Garrett pulled her close, careful of her belly where their second daughter grew. "Not once. Not even on the hardest days." "Why not?" He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. Behind them, through the glass, their family and friends continued celebrating. Robert and Charlotte looking 10 years younger than when they'd first met. Preston and Patricia's teenagers laughing with foundation mechanics. Vivian and Marcus planning their next fundraising trip to Europe. Amanda Reeves explaining to new donors exactly what the foundation meant to mechanics trying to maintain integrity in an exploitative industry. "Because you helped me understand something important." His voice was steady, certain. "The greatest wealth in the world is showing up for people when you have nothing to gain. Everything else is just details." Caroline kissed him as the city stretched below, full of people whose cars would break down tomorrow, who would need help next week, who would find their way to foundation shops run by mechanics believing that fairness and quality could coexist. Inside, their 3-year-old daughter's laughter echoed through photographs being passed around. In 3 months, another daughter would arrive to join their family. The foundation would continue growing. 50 shops planned over the next 5 years, expansion into 10 more states, a training program that would teach hundreds of mechanics that dignity and profit weren't opposing forces. There would be challenges ahead neither could predict. Economic downturns that would test the foundation's sustainability. Family health scares that would remind them how fragile everything was. The ordinary struggles of maintaining love across decades, misunderstandings and hurt feelings, and the constant work of choosing each other when easier options presented themselves. But tonight, standing on a balcony overlooking Portland, Garrett and Caroline held each other and felt the weight of what they'd built. Not perfect, not finished, but real and meaningful and worth every risk they'd taken. The foundation was their legacy, proof that values could scale, that one person's kindness could multiply across communities, that you didn't have to change who you were to make larger impact. But their real legacy stood between them. The choice to build something honest when performance would have been easier. The decision to risk vulnerability when armor was safer. The courage to believe that being truly seen was worth the danger of being truly known. Rain began falling on the balcony above them, washing the city clean. Tomorrow would come with all its complications and opportunities. They would face them together, one honest choice at a time. Because they'd learned the most important lesson, that wealth measured in love and impact and honest connection was the only wealth that actually mattered. Everything else was just noise.